Montana Territory, 1883. The morning frost still clung to the tall grass when the cowboy on the sorrel mare rode up the narrow path toward the cabin. He had a basket balanced in one hand, reins in the other, and a quiet steadiness in his dark eyes. Delaney Zeller was already outside, hauling wood from the stack by the side of the house. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hair braided and tied back, her cheeks red from the cold. When she saw him, she straightened, hands on her hips. "You are early again," she said, not unkindly. Jesse Whitlow tipped his hat and dismounted in one smooth motion. Chickens were restless. Figured the eggs would not wait. He set the basket on the porch rail, careful not to jostle it. Inside were 6 brown eggs wrapped in straw. Delaney walked up the steps, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I could walk down to the ranch and get them myself, you know?" "You could," Jesse said, meeting her gaze. "But I like the ride." She looked away first. It had been 4 months since she arrived in the valley. A widow with 2 children and no husband's name to speak aloud. The man who fathered her babies had taken off east with promises that never landed. Delaney had come here from Kansas, her children in the back of a wagon, her hands blistered but steady. Aurelia was 8. Asher was 5. Both were too thin when they arrived, their eyes too quiet. But the land was kind, the soil good, and the mountains wrapped around them like arms. Jesse had shown up on the second morning, silent as a shadow, holding a basket of eggs. He had not missed a day since. "Is Asher feeling better?" he asked now, glancing toward the window. Delaney nodded. "Fever broke last night." Aurelia read to him till he fell asleep. "Good girl," Jesse said. Delaney leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "You do not have to keep bringing things, Jesse. We're managing." He looked at her then, really looked. "I know you are. That's not why I come." Before she could answer, the door opened and Aurelia stepped out, her dark hair in 2 tight braids. "Mama, Asher wants porridge," she said, then spotted Jesse and smiled. "Eggs again." Jesse grinned. "Fresh as they come." Aurelia took the basket with both hands and disappeared back inside. Delaney turned back to Jesse, but he was already stepping off the porch. "I will be by tomorrow." "Jesse," he paused, hand on the reins. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat, mounted, and rode off, dust rising behind him. That night, after the children were in bed, Delaney sat beside the fireplace, mending one of Aurelia's dresses. The silence felt heavier than usual. She kept thinking of the way Jesse had looked at her calm, steady, like he had all the time in the world. She had not known many men like that. The fire crackled. Outside, a coyote called into the cold. She finished her stitching and set the dress aside, staring into the flames. Maybe tomorrow she would ask if he wanted coffee. Morning came with snow. Not much, just a dusting, but enough to make the world white and quiet. Delaney swept the porch, then gathered water from the well. She heard the horse before she saw him. Jesse rode up, bundled in his coat, the same basket in his hand. Before he could dismount, Delaney called, "Come inside. It's too cold to stand out here." He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the warmth hit his face, and so did the smell of biscuits baking. Aurelia sat near the hearth brushing her doll's hair. Asher was curled under a quilt, still pale but awake. Delaney took the basket and set it on the table. "I made coffee." Jesse stood awkwardly near the door until she waved him toward the chair. They sat quietly. He drank slow. She watched his hands, rough and tan, curled around the cup. "Do you ever get tired of riding all this way?" she asked. "No," he said. "It gives me something to look forward to." Their eyes met. Delaney looked away, cheeks warm. "The children like you. You have been good to them." I care about them, Jessie said simply. Then, after a beat, and I care about you. The room fell still. Delaney's hand rested on the table, fingers curled. I know you do not owe me anything, Jessie said, voice low. But I will keep showing up. With eggs, with help, with whatever you need. She did not answer. Not with words. Her hand slid across the table, brushing his. He turned his palm up, let her fingers settle into his. A week later, Asher was fully recovered, and the snow melted off the hills. The sun stayed longer in the sky. Jessie kept riding up the trail each morning. Sometimes he brought eggs, sometimes flour. Once, a carved wooden bird for Aurelia. That morning, he stepped onto the porch with no basket. Delaney opened the door halfway. No eggs today? Jessie's voice was steady. I brought my love if you'll take it. The wind stilled. Delaney blinked, her breath catching. Jessie stood there, every bit the cowboy he was, dust on his boots, hat in his hand, heart in his eyes. I do not want to just bring things anymore, he said. I want to stay. Delaney stepped out onto the porch, the door swinging shut behind her. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up, curled her fingers into the collar of his coat, and kissed him. It was not shy. It was not unsure. It was yes. Inside, Aurelia peeked through the curtain and smiled. Asher, beside her, whispered, Is Jessie going to be our pa now? Aurelia nodded. I think he already is. Later that night, under the same roof, Delaney tucked her children in. Jessie sat by the fire, legs stretched out, his hand resting on her sewing basket like it belonged there. And it did. The spring thaw brought a different rhythm to the valley. Snowmelt ran in thin silver ribbons down the slopes, and the earth softened beneath boots and hooves alike. The creek behind Delaney's cabin swelled with runoff, its song louder by day, deeper by night. Ducks returned to the marshland, and the scent of wet pine clung to every breeze. Jessie began staying past breakfast. He'd rise before the rest of the ranch hands stirred, ride out with the stars still fading, and arrive in time to carry water or chop a new stack of firewood before Delaney lit the stove. When Aurelia asked if he'd be there for lunch, he'd only glance toward Delaney, waiting for her answer. She never said no. One morning, while Jessie swept out the lean-to they'd started converting into a tool shed, Delaney stepped out with a tin plate and a folded cloth napkin. She handed it to him without ceremony: 2 biscuits, a slice of smoked pork, and a wedge of stewed apple. I've been meaning to ask why you never take your coat off when you're here, she said, brushing her hands on her apron. He set the plate on the stump beside him. Didn't want to presume. Figured coats meant I could leave easy, if you ever changed your mind. She studied him. I haven't. He unbuttoned the coat without another word. Beneath it, his shirt was worn soft. The sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. His suspenders faded with sun. When he looked up, her eyes were still on him. He didn't look away. That afternoon, Delaney caught Asher dragging a stick through the muddy yard. His boots caked and his brow furrowed. What are you up to? She asked, pulling Aurelia's clean laundry from the line. I'm making a fence, he said, for when Jessie brings his horse to stay. She paused, clothespin in hand. Does Jessie know he's bringing his horse to stay? He will, Asher said, then wiped his nose on his sleeve and kept dragging. Later that week, Jessie helped Aurelia build a wooden shelf to hold her growing stack of library books, donated by the circuit teacher who passed through every 3rd month. Delaney watched from the threshold as Aurelia handed Jessie nails while he braced the board level. You ever think about having children? Delaney asked softly once Aurelia had gone inside for the hammer. Jessie leaned on the edge of the window, his eyes following the girl. I think about raising yours. Delaney didn't answer him right away. She reached for a slat of wood and turned it over in her hands. I didn't come here to find anyone, she said. I didn't either, he said, voice low. She placed the board on the shelf between them. But you're here. I am. That night, Jesse didn't ride home. A storm blew in sudden from the west, wind scraping the cabin walls and rain drumming the roof. After the children were asleep, Jesse sat by the hearth in his socked feet while Delaney stitched the hem of a curtain that had torn loose from its hook. You ever get tired of being alone before? She asked, eyes on her needle. He thought for a long while. The fire popped as a log settled deeper. I didn't notice how quiet it was till I started hearing your voice in the mornings. Her hand slowed. You're not just saying things to be kind, are you? I'm not the kind to say something I don't mean. She set the curtain in her lap, thread still looped. I don't know what to do with someone like you, Jesse. He leaned forward, elbows to knees. You don't have to do anything. Just let me stay. She nodded once. In the morning, Jesse fed the chickens before the sun had fully broken through the mist. Delaney stood by the door, her shawl pulled tight, watching him move through the yard like he'd belonged to it all along. When he reached for the feed sack, Aurelia came up behind him with a half-full pail and handed it over without a word. At midday, Jesse returned from the creek with fresh caught trout, cleaned and wrapped in burlap. Delaney took them from him with a glance that said more than thanks. That evening, as the children played with river stones near the porch, Delaney handed Jesse a folded bundle of cloth. What's this? He asked. Spare shirt. I mended the collar, she said. Figured if you're staying past breakfast, you'll need something clean to wear come morning. He took it without speaking, but his thumb brushed slowly along the stitching at the neckline. Aurelia looked up from the yard just as Jesse turned toward the barn. What's he smiling at? Delaney didn't answer. She only watched the way he walked, steady and sure, like a man who'd found his place. Inside, that night, Jesse asked if there was a shelf space for his books. There's room, she said, and left the lantern lit until he finished unpacking them. Jesse built the porch rail higher that month. Delaney hadn't asked, it just made sense with Asher growing bolder, always leaning too far out to see what the chickens were chasing. Jesse cut the boards by hand and fitted them one by one while Delaney shelled peas at the table, her skirts brushing the floor as she shifted from foot to foot. You always work this quiet? She asked, watching his back through the open door. I reckon if I talk too much, I'll say something I didn't think through first. She smiled at that, though he couldn't see it. And what happens when you do? I try to fix it the next day. When he stepped inside to rinse sawdust from his arms, she handed him a cup of water without speaking. He drank slowly, the cold pulling a breath from him. She watched the line of his jaw move as he swallowed. She hadn't realized how much she listened for the sound of his boots moving through her yard until she caught herself still listening when he was already standing beside her. That evening, while Aurelia read aloud from a borrowed volume about prairie grasses, Jesse sat beside Delaney near the hearth, whittling a thin strip of pine into something slender and curved. Asher leaned over his shoulder, eyes wide. What is it gonna be? A fiddle bridge, Jesse said. For a fiddle that doesn't exist yet. Delaney lowered her mending. You play. Used to. My brother had one. He left it behind when he went north. It cracked in a dry spell. He gone long. Too long to call him back. She didn't press him. She only nodded and returned to her stitching. Later, when the children had gone to bed, Jesse lingered outside, oiling the hinges on the barn doors. Delaney brought a plate wrapped in cloth and leaned against the frame. You don't need to fix everything, she said. Some things are fine just worn. He glanced at her hands, then at her face. I like what's quiet and kept, even if it creaks. She handed him the plate. He sat on the edge of the wheelbarrow and ate quietly, the night wind brushing dust from his trousers. She stayed beside him, arms folded against the cooling air. "I got a letter today," she said after a while. "From the man who sold me the wagon. Said he's moving back east. Wants to know if I'll sell it back. Will you?" "No," she said. "I don't need the money, and I don't want to owe anyone the feeling of escape." Jesse wiped his hands on a cloth. "You think you'll ever leave this place?" She looked toward the distant tree line, where the last of the light was pulling pink across the sky. "I think I already arrived." The next morning, Jesse brought a folded scrap of paper tucked into his coat. He left it on the windowsill without saying anything. Delaney found it while sweeping. The handwriting was careful, the words few. "You said once you didn't know what to do with someone like me. But I do. I know what to do with you." She folded it and tucked it into the top drawer of her sewing table. That Sunday, Jesse rode into town for supplies. He returned with a box wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. He didn't hand it to Delaney. He gave it to Aurelia. "It's not new," he said, "but it holds a tune." Aurelia unwrapped it slowly, her breath catching. Inside was a fiddle with a dark walnut finish, the bow strung fresh. The bridge was already in place. "I don't know how to play," she whispered. "You'll learn," Jesse said. "I'll show you." Delaney stood behind her daughter, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Jesse didn't look away from the girl, but he reached out, and his fingers found Delaney's wrist. She didn't pull away. That night, Jesse took his boots off at the door without asking. Delaney handed him a pair of socks she'd knit from leftover yarn. He put them on slow, careful not to stretch the heels. They lay beside each other in the quiet afterward, not touching yet, not needing to. The fire had gone low, the children asleep in the loft. Jesse turned his head toward her. "You believe a man can be made new, just by staying?" She looked at him, her lashes catching the lamplight. "Only if he wants to be." "I do." "Then you already are." Outside, the wind rustled the pine. Inside, the stillness held. Delaney reached for his hand, and this time, she didn't let go. By early June, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out full. Their green shimmer flickered across the roof of the cabin in the afternoons, painting the walls inside with a soft, moving light. The air carried the scent of damp earth and pine resin, and the ground held the memory of rain for days after a storm. Delaney stood at the edge of the garden, one hand shading her brow as she studied the rows. The beans were climbing well, but the turnips had gone leggy, and she'd need to thin them before the roots suffered. Jesse knelt beside the squash hills, his shirt damp at the neck, dirt beneath his nails. "You ever think of putting in corn?" he asked, brushing soil from a sprouting vine. "Not enough hands," Delaney said. "But maybe next year." Jesse ran his fingers over the edge of a leaf. "What if there were?" She looked down at him. "That a question or a plan?" He met her eyes. "I'd like to give you both." She didn't answer right away. A robin landed on the fence post, cocking its head at the rows of green. Delaney watched it a moment, then crouched beside Jesse, knees pressing into the turned soil. "I've had to count on myself for a long time," she said. "Longer than I care to tally. I know. I don't want to hand that over to someone who might walk when the season turns hard. I've stayed through snow, sickness, and silence," he said, voice low. "If I was going to leave, I'd have left when it was easy." She reached over and touched his arm, her thumb brushing against the crease at his elbow. "Then help me dig." They worked without more words, side by side, until the sun passed overhead. That evening, Delaney turned over a folded piece of paper with Jesse's handwriting on the back. A map, hand-drawn, showing where the ridge curved north past the creek and flattened into a clearing she hadn't walked since the snow melted. He'd marked out a square. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. "If you ever want more room," he said, setting down his tin cup. Enough for a stall and a pen. Maybe even a second cabin, if the children grow restless. She studied the drawing. You think that far ahead? I think about you, he said, and what you might need before you ask. Aurelia stepped into the room carrying a strip of calico she'd been hemming. Is Jesse staying through the summer? Delaney looked at Jesse. He didn't speak. Yes, Delaney said. He is. The girl didn't reply. She just nodded and went back to the hearth. Later, Jesse lit a lantern and climbed the ladder to the loft, a bundle tucked under one arm. Asher sat up at once, rubbing his eyes. What's that? Something your mama said you'd outgrown, Jesse told him, unwrapping a small quilted blanket. But I thought maybe it still fits on your bed. Asher reached for it, then hugged it to his chest without a word. Delaney watched from below, her hands still, her breath caught somewhere just beneath her ribs. That night, after the children were asleep, Jesse stood in the doorway with a tin of oil in one hand, his gaze on the hinges at the top of the frame. You see something needs fixing? Delaney asked. No, he said, setting the tin down. Just making sure it lasts. She stepped beside him, arms folded. You always this careful? Only with things I want to keep. She leaned against him, her shoulder resting against his chest. He wrapped his arm around her without hesitation, and they stood like that a long while, the wind soft against the eaves, the fire behind them low. The next morning, Delaney woke before the rooster. She found Jesse already outside, cutting lumber into even lengths. She watched him from the window, the rhythm of his work steady, his jaw set with quiet purpose. She didn't need to ask what he was building. Whatever it was for them. Inside, Aurelia stirred the pot on the stove while Asher rubbed sleep from his eyes. The cabin held a stillness that wasn't empty anymore. It was full, rooted, warm in a way no fire could make. Delaney poured water into the basin and washed her hands slowly, thinking not of what she'd lost, but of what had grown in its place. That afternoon, she walked the North Trail with Jesse. At the clearing, she stopped where he'd drawn the square. Wildflowers pushed through the grass, and the earth was soft beneath her boots. I could see a porch, she said. Maybe a window here, facing west. Jesse smiled, not with his mouth, but with the easing of his shoulders. I'll build it how you want it. Every board. She took his hand, fingers lacing through his, and held it tight. You already have. The sun set later now. Long amber light stretched across the valley well into the evening, brushing golden across the slope behind the cabin. The garden was taking hold, and the new porch rail had already caught Asher once, saving him from a tumble into the yard when he tripped chasing a stick. Delaney had stitched a patch onto his trousers that night, and Jesse had teased him gently while brushing dust from his knees. Jesse's tools had found a corner in the lean-to, and Delaney no longer looked twice when she passed them. His saddle, once set near the door like a guest's coat, now hung in the barn beside hers. He rode less often, and only into town when something was needed. His place was here now. That morning, Delaney pressed her hand against the cabin wall and listened. Inside, Aurelia was reading aloud from a volume Jesse had brought back from town, a book of bird calls and migrations. Her voice carried clear and sure, and Asher's questions followed close behind. Delaney stepped away and closed the barn door behind her, dusting her palms on her apron. Jesse leaned against the fence, watching the sky. His hat was tipped back, his hair sun-warmed. She joined him there, arms folded. You ever think about what else might be built here? He asked, nodding toward the open stretch beyond the garden. I think about what needs finishing first, she said. I'm not just talking about buildings. She looked up at him. Say what you mean, Jesse. He turned toward her, slow and certain. We're already living like it's ours. You, me, the children. But I haven't asked proper. Delaney held his gaze. You don't need to ask. I want to. He reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a narrow ring of braided gold, simple and fine. Had it made in town. Gave them my mother's locket to melt down for it. Delaney stepped back, her breath caught. I didn't want to bring something new into what you've already made strong, he said. I wanted to give from what I carry. She took the ring, held it in her palm. The metal was warm from his skin. You sure about this? I've been sure since the first time you didn't flinch when I stayed silent. She slipped the ring onto her finger and let her hand settle in his. They married by the creek 2 days later. The teacher rode out from town with a small ledger and a black coat, and Aurelia picked wildflowers for Delaney's hair. The ceremony was short, the vows quiet. Jessie stood tall in a laundered shirt, boots polished, hair combed back with water. Delaney wore her best dress, a pale blue one she'd saved from Kansas. The children stood close, Aurelia holding Asher's hand. Afterward, they shared bread and preserves on the porch. The children ate with their fingers, laughing too loud and not minding the jam on their chins. Jesse sat with one arm around Delaney's waist, his thumb brushing against the curve of her spine. That night, Delaney lit a lamp and set it near the window. Jesse came in from the barn carrying Asher, fast asleep against his shoulder. He laid the boy down in the loft, pulled the quilt over his small frame, then paused to tuck Aurelia's braid behind her ear as she whispered goodnight. Downstairs, Delaney waited, the ring catching firelight each time she moved. Jesse came to her without a word, and she reached for him, her hands resting against his chest. I didn't think I'd have this again, she said. You didn't get it again, he said. You made it new. They lay together in the warm hush of the cabin, the night wind soft against the walls, the earth settled around them. Over the months that followed, Jesse built the new shed near the clearing, and Delaney planted corn for the first time. The children grew stronger with the season. Aurelia learned her first song on the fiddle, and Jesse played beside her, the sound of 2 bows weaving through the twilight. They took in a stray dog that Asher named Moss, who guarded the hens like they were his own. Delaney taught Jesse how to make soap from the lye barrel out back, and he taught her how to stretch a fence line without it sagging come fall. They were never idle but never hurried. The work was real, the days full, and when the nights came, they came together. Years passed quiet and sure. The cabin grew, as did the family within it. Jesse's beard turned silver at the chin, and Delaney's braid lightened at the temples. But their hands stayed steady, their voices low and kind. One summer, Aurelia left to teach in a nearby town. Asher took over the garden rows, his shoulders broadening, his laugh deepening. Delaney stood on the porch, Jesse's arm around her, watching their sunstring fence wire across the field. He's taller than you now, she said. He'll still need help when the plow breaks. Good, she said. I like when they come home. Jesse kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. So do I. They stood in the late light, the valley stretched wide before them, the barn casting long shadows, the creek whispering just out of sight. And behind them, the home they had built, each board, each nail, each morning shared stood steady against the wind.